Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be a little chat about fantasy and science fiction world building. Inspired a bit because earlier this month I read Brian McClellan's Sins of Empire, the first book in his new series, which is called Gods of Blood and Powder, which is set in the same world as his previous trilogy, which was the Powder Mage trilogy. These are flintlock fantasies, which is to say that they have a setting that is somewhat reminiscent of the late 18th, early 19th century. The first trilogy was set in sort of a pseudo-France, where they go through some countries that are maybe loosely pseudo-Spain, pseudo-Morocco as well, which is one of the things that I admire about the series, because so much fantasy is set in a kind of pseudo-12th century England, or maybe a pseudo-17th century Japan. So to get something that is both more modern in terms of technology and just, not being one of those two countries was one of the reasons I really enjoyed the original series. I also think it has a fantastic magic system. It does an interesting thing where they have traditional mages who do kind of what traditional fantasy, throwing fireballs and whatnot. But they also have the Powder Mages that the first series was named after, who are able to manipulate gunpowder. They also have a sort of almost witch doctor style magic, which is dealt with more in this series. There was one character who performed that style of magic in the original series, and there's more of that in this one, which I was interested in. Also, they have the minor magics, which are sort of talents more than anything else. And then there was also an implication in the original series that there was a newer evolving form of magic, which they haven't gotten into in these yet, but I think will maybe be touched in as it goes on. So that's the background for this. I feel like it's become fairly common in fantasy now to see a set universe and then multiple books set in different locations in that universe, which is what I was expecting in this. I avoided spoilers as much as I could, because with this kind of plot-driven fantasy, I really enjoy discovering the pieces along the way. And the one thing that I thought was unfortunate is that even though it's in the same world, I wasn't expecting it to have quite as many repeat characters from the first series. Now, I know for a lot of people that would be a huge selling feature, that they want to see, what happened next to those people, but that's actually something that is always really disappointing for me. I know I've talked about the Robin Hobbs Fitz and the Fool trilogy, which the third book is going to be coming out in a little over a month now. I've been really enjoying that, but I always feel like what's disappointing is that she keeps going back to that same Fitz-chivalry character, because while I like him, I feel like it's almost a waste of world building to not hear more about other places. Now, she obviously does series in between those series that are set in other places within those worlds, so it's not necessarily a critique specifically of her. But just coming into this book, I hadn't realized how many repeat characters there would be. It doesn't have the same main characters, but there are a couple of main characters who do show up, who I wasn't expecting, and the one that I was expecting was a secondary character who shows up here as one of the main characters. So that was a little bit disappointing. It's not that it's done poorly, it's just that I was hoping we were getting an entirely new cast. Overall, in terms of writing, I enjoyed this. It flowed nicely. It had solid pacing. As with the original Powder Mage series, it has different characters who are followed. One is an investigator, one is a mercenary leader, one is a prisoner whose prisoner number is Jean Valjean's number backwards. So that was kind of cute. It's a solid story. I'm interested to see what happens. It does a good job of wrapping up the immediate plot lines, because I think a lot of fantasy series leave you on these cliffhangers where you kind of sit there and go, oh, what I'm really reading is not two 600-page books, it's one 1,200-page book. This was not like that. It had overarching, grander plots that were going to continue, but the actual immediate threats were dealt with in a way that I thought was great, in terms of both building enough suspense for the story, but not so much that you felt unsatisfied upon finishing it. So that was well done. To go back to another complaint, or not even a complaint, but a little disappointment, again, because I didn't read a lot about the plot, I didn't realize that this was going to be much less military focused. It is much more in a pre-existing, there's a colonial occupation going on, basically, and there is a mercenary company in there that is sitting there. There is one grand battle at the end, but I think with the other series there was much more of a focus on both tactics and battle scenes. And in this, there was very little of that. If you were reading hoping for some grand battles, this is not going to give them. But overall, I mean, it was a solid read. You definitely can't make everybody happy, because as I said, I was disappointed to see more of the same characters, but I know just as many people would probably like to have had more focus on the old primary characters. Somewhat relatedly, Mass Effect Andromeda just came out last week, and I have been playing it since it came out. And yeah, if you've seen complaints, it does have some really bad animation. But not to talk about that, but to talk about the story, it's almost strange because they take... This is set in a different galaxy than the main series. So theoretically, we should be getting all new world building. But because they took 4 of the main species from the original series and took them over there, you have elements of both, which again, I feel like it was a bit of a mixed thing, because there aren't really repeat characters, but you do get, and again, I don't want to spoil things, but there's someone who is a son of someone that you knew in the original trilogy. There's someone who is a cousin of kind of a joke character from that one. There are references to characters. And again, it's a tough one because I've talked to people who wanted more references to the original, and I want it less. So it's obviously a hard line for any creator to walk, because it's not that I don't... Because, I mean, I loved a lot of the characters in this series, but part of what I love is that I don't know, aside from the ones who died, I don't know how they turned out. So, and I like the not knowing. So that's something I've been thinking about in the context of these two things. So I was going to ask, what's your preference? If you're reading science fiction, fantasy, any kind of speculative fiction that has an invented world like this, and if the creators or the author is revisiting that world, do you prefer to see the same characters and see how their lives develop, or do you prefer to see a different set of characters and a different set of everything? I wonder if there are any trends to that. Do you feel differently if it's a book versus a comic series versus a game versus a TV series? Anyway, that's it for now. Ciao!